All right. Welcome to our presentation on the legend of Ogopogo. I am Jason Hewlett,
And I am Eli Watson.
and we're going to be chatting for the next half hour or so, basically about Ogopogo, covering off why we wanted to talk about Ogopogo, what is Ogopogo, and then we'll provide a few final thoughts on the whole experience. We're going to be touching on my book, The Legend of Ogopogo, Canada's Loch Ness Monster, and Eli's film, Cursed
Cursed
Waters.
Waters. Yes. The Cursed Waters, the creature of Lake Okanagan. Yes.
Which by now actually is out, as is the book, both from Small Town Monsters. So, all right. So, Eli, why don't you just share a little bit about who you are?
Sure. So I'm like a filmmaker, and that's a quote right there. I'm like a filmmaker and a director at Small Town Monsters. I also host a podcast called Cryptid Campfire.
Awesome.
That, that's me in a nutshell.
But you in a nutshell. And as for me, who is Jason Hewlett? Basically, I too am a filmmaker, author, paranormal researcher, investigator from Canada, actually, British Columbia, Canada. And I live about 2 hours from Lake Okanagan, where Ogopogo is believed to reside. That's basically me in a nutshell as well. Eli and I don't
Yeah.
we're not deep people. We keep it pretty shallow.
Well, I don't I don't know what else about me is pertinent to this presentation, but
This is very true. I know. Same with me. Like I could go into my whole life story if I thought people would find it interesting, but they're not here to listen to us. They're here to find out about what Ogopogo is. So why Ogopogo? So Eli, why don't you explain why you can start off by saying why you're interested in Ogopogo, like what kind of got you interested, and then I'll kind of dive in as well, if you'll pardon the pun.
well, why Ogopogo? See, I feel like I don't have a great answer for this, but when I started the podcast with my two co-hosts, Cryptid Campfire, back in 2018, the very first episode we did was called Battle of the Lake Monsters, and our wonderful idea was to cover three lake monsters in 30 minutes. And so obviously we had Loch Ness Monster, Champ, the Lake Champlain Monster, and then Ogopogo. And so it's always kind of been there. I couldn't tell you like the first time I ever heard about Ogopogo because, for reference, I'm from Southern California. Canadian lake monsters aren't, a topic of everyday conversation down here in San Diego. So
They're
they're
not.
just
I'm
no.
baffled by that.
But yeah, so then, fast forward a few years, and I'm working with Small Town Monsters, and I'm doing my own series called Mysteries and Monsters. And I was, Seth Breedlove likes to do shoots in a kind of conjoined effort. So if there can be multiple projects being made on the same trip, he's all for it. And so we were going up to British Columbia to do an On the Trail of Bigfoot movie, and I was like, hey, what's close by is Ogopogo, and I think I should make an episode of my series while I'm there. And he was all for it. So, 'cause, I mean, up to this point, we had only one lake monster documentary in our repertoire, which was Champ, On the Trail of Champ. And so Ogopogo was something very different. It's not Sasquatch, it's not UFOs, it's a lake monster, and it's very cool. So that's basically why I wanted to do Ogopogo. There wasn't anything super special about it.
I think that's pretty cool, though. I mean, the fact that I think even someone in SoCal would know what Ogopogo is, I think speaks to how the story is it's expanded beyond the border of Canada to a degree. I think more so now that the STM projects have kind of come out, a lot more people are becoming aware of Ogopogo. I grew
Mm.
up with it. Like I said, I live 2 hours away from Kelowna. And so growing up, I heard the stories as part of our folklore here in British Columbia. And whenever my family and I would go to Kelowna when I was a kid, because it was like closer than Vancouver, better shopping, better foods, we'd always go for weekend trips. And I had to go to like the shores of Lake Okanagan and see if I could see Ogopogo. And of course, there's this Olin statue that's in the Kelowna Park, so I'd have to go there. and hang out on the statue. And then as I got older and had a family of my own, I'd take my son, same thing. And he's all well aware of what Ogopogo is. So if you're from British Columbia, you can't escape the story of Ogopogo. So I was researching the book, what became the book, at almost the same time that you told me you were coming up to Canada to work on the Mysteries and Monsters episode. And of course you're like, do you want to come? And I'm like, yeah, I'll come, and we've got to work on this project together. And of course it morphed into what it is. So that, I guess, is why Eli and I are talking to you about this subject now.
Well, I have a quick little question for you.
For sure.
Growing up down here, uh, I grew up with legends of the chupacabra more than anything, and there's a lot of things that I heard growing up that just aren't true. Like the chupacabra comes out in the full moon. That's just not true. But is there anything like that with Ogopogo that you heard growing up that you discovered in the making of this project that just is not true?
No, it was kind of the other way around. Like what I thought was Ogopogo was something far more, as we discovered while making the documentary. I wasn't, I knew that there was the whole Indigenous story, but I didn't know that Ogopogo wasn't, it's a made up word. You know what I mean? All this stuff we
Mm,
discovered about how Western culture basically took the story and ran with it on their own. I had no idea. I thought that was the story. So it's more like what I thought was the story became kind of a little bit wrong. It was like the opposite of that, actually, which I thought was really fascinating. Um,
interesting.
I didn't expect. And so what is Ogopogo? That's what we're going to talk about now. And you can kind of see this really cool graphic over there showing basically what Ogopogo looks like. It's got a long snake-like reptilian body, the head of like a horse or a dragon, sometimes with a mane, and then a forked tail, like a whale's tail. Um,
Mm,
is basically the one. So we'll sort of touch on Ogopogo lore by discussing sort of the book, The Legend of Ogopogo and Cursed Waters, and how we kind of basically, I think, made it, if that works for you, Eli, because that kind of became our means of learning about this creature. And it's a little bit of shameless self-promotion. And there's Eli and I at the statue in Kelowna Park as well. That was on the first day, I think, that we were there. And that was the first day we'd actually met face to face, wasn't it, Eli?
yeah, it was. Pretty legendary first photo together, I think.
I think so too. At the statue, like we talked many times before, but and did video calls, but never like face to face. So I guess the
Mm,
first thing that we really did, like the first day, was kind of us hanging out, getting acquainted, planning. Well, we already planned the shoot and the research, but it was the first, that was just sort of shooting like B-roll, etc. So the first thing we really did was we interviewed Dale and Colleen on the day one of what was a fast-paced 2-day shoot, wasn't it, Eli?
yeah, yeah. Day one of two. Yeah.
Became a feature
Uh,
film documentary at the same time. That was crazy.
but yeah, Dale, Colleen, and Myrna, well, I guess Colleen is the one who took the photograph. They had a sighting of what they believed to be Ogopogo back in October of 2022. That photo went viral all over the internet. I mean, I remember I probably learned about it in November of 22 when it made its way to cryptozoology subreddits and stuff like that. And no one really had a clue as to what they were really looking at. There was no formal investigation into it, as far as formal can be in the world of cryptozoology. But I mean, they did one interview with the local news, and that was it. And, you had people weighing in from Wisconsin saying that it was a bird, and people saying that it was a wolf or a moose. And there was, I mean, just so
A
many theories.
dog, a crawfish, a
Yeah,
decaying
a
upside down
crawfish.
crawfish.
And so what's really unique about the documentary and the book and just being there was that in May of 2023, when we filmed it, we were the first people to interview them about it, which is just like, how does that happen for
Like
7
7 months
months?
later, wasn't it? Yeah, because November, December,
Yeah,
January, February, March, April, May. Yeah, 7 months after, no one had gone up and talked to them. They just spouted, and I'll bring the picture up, actually. I'm gonna do that. I kind of already showed it just really quickly earlier in the presentation, but that's the
yeah.
picture. Um, and it looks like, if you go back, a lot like that's more of a cartoony representation. But you and I, because
Mhm,
Colleen gave us a copy of that picture, and we even went back to the statue
mhm,
and put the picture up, and you can see like there's the representation there. You can see the horns, an
yep,
eye, a snout. You can see the trailing off underwater.
yep,
What could be like a long serpentine neck. Um, a lot of people had their theories, but once we went out on the boat, like we were almost in the middle of the lake in several hundred feet of water, and your perspective changes. And they're saying that the head, from their perspective, is like 3 feet wide.
mhm,
That's huge. That would have to have been a really big decaying upside down crawfish for it to
yeah,
be like
and
that, or a dog or something swimming way out there. That they're what they had to say was there's a lot of credibility to their story,
yeah.
I think.
I'll say the biggest pushback that I found against that photo is the presence of the horns. I don't A lot of people seem to think that it's not legitimate just based off of the horns alone because the majority of Ogopogo sightings don't have horns, but for me, it's like almost every single depiction of Ogopogo, even in Hahaitku in the West Bank First Nations folklore, they depict it with horns as well. So it's like, where does the observance? You don't add horns to things that don't have horns. Like how many bear depictions in Kelowna have horns?
None,
None, because
because
bears don't have horns. So to me, it's indicative that there is some sort of observable quality on this creature. Maybe not all of them, as we explore kind of in the movie. Maybe not all Ogopogo creatures have horns. Maybe it's a male uh, exclusive trait, which, sexual dimorphism is a thing we see in the animal kingdom all the time. So maybe only the males have horns, and males would be seen less frequently, but still be seen every once in a while. Or maybe it's going even further in that direction. Maybe they're like a pinniped like animal, to where those are things that inflate during mating season. And so they're not even there all the time. So maybe this is just sitting there trying to attract the mate. I don't know. That's extremely speculative, but that's that's where I kind of fall with that. So if you had any wondering about what I think about this photo, is I think it's legitimate.
as do I, Eli. Like when you're out in the water at that location, hearing their story, seeing the representation there and how it ties into like every other first Indigenous First Nations representation. And we were keeping in mind too, like this was October. I think it was like October 15th or something like that. Um,
Mhm,
they were like the only boat on the water, and they have a sailboat, so their boat makes no noise. It's right smack in the middle of we have a salmon run every year at that time, and then salmonoid fish are the primary fish inside Lake Okanagan. So if there's a species there existing, it's probably eating salmon. So salmon is plentiful. It's quiet. There's no one on the water. So that would be a time that you would think something that is an elusive creature might feel safe to surface.
mhm,
And maybe it's feeding or something like that, like you say, trying to attract a mate. Like we're speculating here, but that's all we can do in these situations. But it just makes
right,
sense that if there is a creature in Lake Okanagan, this would be a perfect time for it to be surfacing. I think most of the time it would probably be up at night when there's no one on the water really, and it's probably safer to kind of feed and hang out, which is why maybe there's not so many sightings. But for a
right.
daytime sighting, this makes perfect sense.
Yeah, if I may add too, the horns protruding out of the water may, in some weird way, act as a sort of camouflage, because you might assume that it's a log or something sticking out of the water. So, how many people have seen something similar to that and just not thought anything of it? I know Dale, Colleen, and Myrna were drawn to it because of how strange and out of place it seemed, yet not everyone's going to think that way, you know? Some people might look at it and just think, "Oh, there's a log," and just keep going on, you know?
Exactly. And I think Dale has spent a lot of, from my interpretation, spends a lot of time on the water, and he keeps an eye out for certain things like dead heads, which are, upside down logs. It could be a boating hazard. I think that's what attracted him initially to it. He saw something and he wanted to
Mhm.
check it out.
Right.
Um, so yeah, no, this is like sort of, I think, the most recent bit of evidence that's come up. And I agree with you, Eli. I think it is, they got Ogopogo. They were one of those lucky few who got it on film.
Yep.
And from when we hung out with Colleen and Dale, we heard about Jackie, who's a friend of theirs, who had an Ogopogo sighting in the 1970s. This is like, we went right over to Dale and Colleen's place to interview her. And Jackie, her story was kind of interesting because it actually, she went and reported it to the radio, and that's what she met Arlene Gall out of
Gall.
that story,
Yeah.
didn't she?
Yeah. So I guess the story was that she was on the shore, I think by the bridge, and I can't remember if it was a friend or she was with other people, and they saw this, form kind of come up out of the lake and kind of had these humps and, traveled through the water, and they realized that it must have been Ogopogo, so they reported it to the news. And I mean, it's kind of a, it's not like the most exciting story when it comes to cryptozoology cases, but it's just an example of how prevalent the sightings of Ogopogo are in Lake Okanagan, and I wish we could have touched on this more, but I mean, I remember stopping into the Lake Okanagan Library there, and or the West Kelowna Library, and running into or asking the librarians what kind of Ogopogo books they had, and they said they didn't have any, but each of the two librarians had some sort of personal connection. They either themselves saw Ogopogo or they knew someone who had seen Ogopogo. And to me, it's just like, dang, I mean, many people don't see stuff that's not there, in my opinion.
I agree. Even when my family and I went back to Kelowna this past March for a little family trip for my wife's birthday, we went into a candy store, and it just came up in conversation because I had Arlene Gall's book. I'd found it, one of her books. Like I was like, "Oh, Ogopogo," and he's like, "Yeah, I know all about that." Blah blah blah. And he just did without hesitation. And I said, "Well, keep an eye out because we got a book and a documentary coming out later this year." And he's like, he's super stoked about it. But yeah,
Sick.
everyone knows it's such a well documented lake monster. I think probably the most documented lake monster in the world, even out in terms of like number of sightings, multiple people seeing this at the same time. You know, footage of it from different. Yeah, it's just like
Yeah.
that many people can't be having like a hallucination or misinterpreting something.
Right. And so you brought up Arlene Gall, who was really the foremost researcher for Ogopogo for decades once she moved to Lake Okanagan in the 1960s. And I mean, she was just kind of I think she was a school teacher or a
A
journalist.
journalist, like she wrote a weekly column for the paper.
Yeah, and just got really invested into it. And she's written multiple books on it, and she passed away, I think in 21
Yeah, yeah, 2021,
and
if my memory serves.
in 2021. So that was, huge loss for the cryptozoology community. But I mean, her research is like you would be hard pressed to find someone who's done more research into Ogopogo than Arlene Gall. And, we ended up contacting her daughter, uh, trying to
Lori,
discuss
yeah.
Lori Gall. And, you know, I reached out with the intention of maybe interviewing her about her mother, but she declined to be interviewed. But, we did get, because Arlene was also a collector of a lot of Ogopogo stuff. So she actually bought the rights to Ogopogo film and photographs. And so to add to that point, a big chunk of her, the last book she wrote, like a huge chunk of that book is just a list of photographs and videos of Ogopogo, like known photographs and videos. And I mean, it's almost like half the book. And I mean, we included, let's see, in the film we have, I believe, 3 pieces of video evidence and 2 photographs. That's 5 pieces of evidence, which I think is a lot for a cryptid documentary, but that is literally just scratching the surface when it comes to Ogopogo. There's so much more that it's just hard to get the rights to, and obviously we have a budget when making the movie, so we can't just keep perpetually licensing footage and putting it into the movie, and then you have to also account for runtime because you don't want the movie to go too long and you're just beating people over the head with lake monster footage. You know?
It's no, it's
So
true. It's true. We only have so long to hold the tension with people, right? But I thought
Yeah.
like you did a great job of putting a lot of information in, Eli. And one piece that you managed to get in there, which I think is one of the most important, is the Folden film. It's the first piece of video evidence of Ogopogo,
Mm.
which we'll get to Susan in a second. But talk about the Folden film there if you can. And we went with Andrew McKay of Into the Portal
Yes,
podcast to what he believed was the location where that film was shot.
correct. So Andrew McKay took us to the rough location of where Art Folden filmed Ogopogo back in 1968. So he was on a family vacation. He was leaving Kelowna. I think he was heading to Penticton. I'm not
That'd
sure.
be about the right angle. He was heading south, and Penticton's to the south.
Yeah, and he saw something moving in the water. He pulled off the side of the highway, pulled out his camera, and started filming it. And so the footage itself is not that great, or rather, I should say that the quality of the footage that we do have is not that great. I know for a fact that Arlene Gall purchased the original Folden film, and so I'm willing to bet somewhere in her archives there is the film, the actual film itself, which I would love to see rescanned and digitally remastered so that it's much higher quality than what I used in the film. Um, but yeah, the fold-in film appears to be showing something, a large object, kind of submerging and re-emerging in the lake, and uh, people say that it's like a beaver or something like that, or ducks, and I think that's ludicrous too because it was obviously enough for him. He saw it from driving on that highway, and it was enough for him to pull over and film it because it was so like, wow, what is that? You don't do that if it's a beaver. I'm not sure if you would even be able to see a beaver in the middle of the lake from the highway.
No, it's a
So,
good distance from the highway down. Like once you're standing there, again, it puts things in perspective, right? And I think they've done analysis to the trees, the height of the
mhm,
trees, to like what they saw in the water, and they figured it was 40 to 60 feet long. Which is big enough to see from a highway. If you're driving that road, you and I drove up and down that road, you'd have to be hard pressed to catch for something to catch your eye
yeah,
being in
oh
that
yeah,
water.
it would have to be pretty big.
Yeah.
So, and I think the estimates they came up with was that it was like 45 to 60 feet, right?
Yep. Yep. 45, somewhere 40 to 60, somewhere in there. Some people say 60, some say within the 40
Yeah.
range, but that's still big. Like,
Yeah,
that's a
yeah,
lot.
it's much bigger than anything else in the lake, so
Yeah. Interesting stuff. And it was neat to be there, like, and just sort of hear Andrew's sort of thoughts on it as well. Then after that, we went to Susan Allison's house. Now, she was the first European settler to see Ogopogo. And what's neat is this is her house, which is now part of Quails Gate Winery.
mhm,
Um, and when you stand there again, it kind of gives you perspective because this isn't like on the where you were standing when you took this picture. It's not like the lake's right there. You've got a good kilometer or so to get to the water. So when she saw something in the water, and again, it had to be significant. And she described it as being a dinosaur in her journal, didn't she?
mhm. Yeah, like a dinosaur. I don't know, that's open for interpretation what exactly that means, but what's significant about that? Because she apparently saw it in 1872, and for her to describe it as a dinosaur means she was pretty up to date because I'm pretty sure dinosaur was a term that was coined in the 1860s.
Yeah, she was. I get the impression she was educated. Like she knew what she was.
Yeah,
She had her wits about her. Um,
yeah.
and there's debate if it was her or her husband, but she's the one credited with the sighting and talking to the West Bank First Nations about it at the time. Where she's the one that took like that Nsnahaitku and turned it into like Nahatik
N
kind of thing. If I remember Coralie
Naitaka,
Miller's,
yeah.
yeah, Nataka
Yeah, yeah,
thing,
yeah.
which we'll get to that in a moment. But she's
I
sort of the
think
first because there's the Métis settler John McDougall who had seen it, I
yes.
think, roughly around the same time, and he's of course the one story that makes Ogopogo out to be this lake demon pulling horses under the water and him having to cut the rope so lest his canoe or whatever get hauled under with them.
Yeah, yeah. So John McDougal, I think he was slightly before Susan Allison. I think he's credited as the first white settler to experience Ogopogo.
Yeah, although he was
Maybe. I'm
Métis from what I understand, which is sort of
Oh,
a little bit of like part native, part Caucasian, I think,
oh,
if my
interesting.
memory serves correct.
There's there's some history I didn't know there. Wow.
Yeah, and I could be wrong suddenly. I'm questioning myself now that I've said it for public consumption, but it's just something about
Yeah.
that sticks to my head. But yeah, he was sort of his was, of course, I think the first significant real encounter, just given the how exciting the story is and terrifying, and how that spread the rumors of this being a ferocious lake beast.
Yeah, and who knows if it's even true. I think that's something to call into question. If
Oh
it's
yeah, that lake currents, man.
Yeah.
If he was indeed out on the water pulling horses, it's a big lake to swim horses across. They could have gotten tired. There's a current. It's a body of water. They could have got pulled under, and then he just attributed it to the Ogopogo, or other people just attributed that to Ogopogo. Or you're right, or it could be a completely BS story. Like,
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, so much gets lost in interpretation and retelling of stories. I mean, why do we even call it Ogopogo? I mean, the Ogopogo is the name of a song, and it got attributed to what's in Lake Kelowna for or Lake Okanagan for whatever reason. And I mean, that the reason itself is lost to time. Who was the
yeah,
first person to call that Ogopogo? We don't know. And why did it stick? We don't know. And so it's like with a story like John McDougal's and him crossing the lake and stuff, it's like, what are you gonna do? Scrape the bottom of the lake to find horse bones at the bottom of the lake? That doesn't prove that they were his horses, you know?
oh yeah,
uh,
there's so much
there's so
speculation going
much.
on here.
Yeah, exactly. So it's I mean, who knows? Maybe it happened to somebody and maybe it didn't even happen to John McDougal. It just got attributed to him. But we don't know. We don't know.
No, we're just going by
Maybe I'm
what
wrong.
the books we're going by
Yeah.
what the books say. All the books seem to attribute to have it. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's so long ago, and there's so much. I find with Ogopogo, there's so much just folklore associated to it and urban legend. Despite that,
Mm,
but Coralie Miller, I think, put a lot into perspective here, because she's from the West Bank First Nations. She runs the museum, which we spent time in. Um, and she provides a lot of information. Like, that was an interesting interview. And for me, Eli, this is kind of talking to her, because I'd interviewed her before we went out to film, and then also we interviewed her on location, where I learned a lot about the story that I didn't know. For one, that it's the West Bank First Nations don't call it Ogopogo. It's
mm,
Nahahidku, it's a dimension walker. It is literally the spirit of the lake itself that shows
mm.
itself from time to time in a physical form, which is the representation with the horns and likewise. Um, and how they're kind of, you know, they're okay with the tourism story, which is the Ogopogo story that came from the song, but they also don't want people to understand, to believe that that is the true story of Ogopogo. To them, the true story is it's a water spirit. They didn't never made sacrifices to it, like chucking cows and chickens and such into the water. They would maybe offer like a little bit of meat, but mostly tobacco, other such things, as respect to go out on the water before traveling on it. And it's just interesting again how Western culture did what it does, and it takes this simple story and it almost blows it out of proportion. I found that to me to be one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole expedition that we went on.
Yeah, I keep thinking about that too, because it almost seems like it's an accidental thing. I don't think you can point to any one person, a Westerner, I mean, and say, oh, it's their fault the story exploded in the way it did. Like I said earlier, we don't know the first person who called it Ogopogo or why the name stuck. We don't know if the John McDougal story is actually true. But what is true is that there's Ogopogo everything now, and I mean, the story has spread so much that a person in Southern California has heard of it. So, I mean, whose fault is that? I think like you said too, I think what's key is that they don't necessarily despise that. They don't they don't, it doesn't seem like, at least what Coralie said, they don't hold any ill will towards people for making Ogopogo merch and capitalizing off of Ogopogo, just as long as there's an understanding that it is different from the spirit of the lake.
And I think the work we did is the first time that's really been driven home.
Mm,
That
mhm,
two different, or that there's these two different perspectives. It's always, if you watch like, Monster Quest or Unsolved Mysteries, which are both folk, or even In Search of it, it's Ogopogo. And I
right,
think we were the first people to really even call it in like a, in what would be called a popular medium of film and book, where we call it by its full full name and tell the full story, the full Indigenous
right.
story behind it.
Well, I think what resonated with both you and me is, what we learned while we were filming this documentary. There's this heart at the center of everything is this like heart of conservation, this desire to preserve the beauty of the lake, and to, I mean, even from, you have John Kirk saying those things as well, and John Kirk being a Westerner and a Canadian, and it there's this big call for we need to protect the beauty of this lake. And I think it's such a deeply personal message, and I think it's one that relates to for so many people, I think that's why, and maybe something that it doesn't necessarily sell a whole lot, which is why it never made it to cable television and, stuff like that, but we have the luxury to kind of pursue the story in the way we see fit, and I think both you and I really resonated with that.
Big time, big time. And it's partly changed my perspective on what Ogopogo could even be.
Mm,
Um, we did, of course, our expedition to Rattlesnake Island, which is believed to be the home of Unsnaha Itku. And we went there with renowned Ogopogo researcher Bill Stesiak, of course, who runs the Ogopogo Quest website, which is
definitely.
a great resource for people who are interested in Ogopogo. He's like, I think, almost got every sighting that's ever been recorded on his website. We were lucky enough to go out there with Coralie and her cousin Kate as well. What was your perspective of Rattlesnake on getting to see there? I mean, this is like where it's agreed that this is where the story kind of, where the lake monster is supposed to reside, tunnels underneath and all.
Yeah, it's it was cool. I don't know.
That's
I
a
don't
good.
know how to explain it. It was like, you hear this name so much, I'll speak for myself only, like I heard this name, Rattlesnake Island. It carries that reputation, oh, it's the home of Ogopogo, and it's covered in rattlesnakes, and it's extremely dangerous, and it's in the middle of Lake Okanagan, and it's extremely difficult to get to, and then we just rented a boat and went there, and
There was no rattlesnakes on the island.
there was no
Haven't seen
rattlesnakes
rattlesnakes there for
there,
years.
it was so, and what kept blowing my mind so much was that that whole area, the Okanagan Valley, looks just like Southern California. And so, like, looking at Rattlesnake Island, I was like, "This could literally be anywhere in SoCal." I mean, so, well, that part kept continually blowing my mind, and obviously it was, like, super cool, like, I mean, as far as, cryptid tourism goes, you have to go to Rattlesnake Island. It's almost like going to Bluff Creek in terms of Bigfooting, it's like you go to Rattlesnake Island, you go to Bluff Creek, and but I mean, nothing. I mean, the other aspect of going there too that I thought was really, really cool was when Coralie and Kate said their prayer and offered the tobacco in the water. Thought that was very, very cool.
That was a really great moment to be there for that, and to just see how they pay respect to this thing that's very important to them and their culture. It's an integral part of it. That was very powerful. Just getting to meet Bill, of course, because he's got this reputation. Like he's been on many of the other like he's been on Monster Quest, etc. And he was to hear his sort of story and all of that, I thought was really neat. And it was, yeah, just to go to this. It's not as big an island as I thought it was. Like, it seems
Mm,
bigger, but when you're there, it's like it's not that big.
mhm.
Um, and it wasn't like it was a really good moment. Like nothing happened. Like we weren't suddenly inundated with being assaulted by lake monsters or anything. But it was just a really
Yeah.
neat place to be. And it was interesting how at that point, because it's kind of in Squally Point, um, like it's just you're like maybe 30 feet from shore, but it's several hundred feet deep because the lake just literally goes straight down like this at this point. I think partly why with the wind, there's the squalls that come up and make the water turbulent. So I thought that was fascinating. So if there's a monster there, it could easily be hiding anywhere below where we were and we would never have known it was there.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's another aspect of the lake is how deep it gets and how quickly that happens, and then the I don't wanna say the murkiness, but the darkness of the water itself, provides a lot of camouflage for anything underneath the water.
Big time. Even when we were doing our little bit at the end, like a lot of people ask Corley, like cryptozoologists who go to Kelowna, well, we want to catch Ogopogo, so how do we do it? And she's like, well, just take a cup, go down to the water and scoop up some water. And when we
Yeah,
did that, just to kind of at the end of our little adventure there, even that water was murky in the cup. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like
it
hold it up,
was.
and you can even see it in film of the little particles that are in there,
Yeah,
which I thought
for
was
sure.
kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, look, it's me.
It's you at Rattlesnake Island. And that there it is. Like literally, you can see it right there. We were only like maybe 30, 40 feet from it. It's not huge.
Yeah,
Like it's not
yeah.
huge at all. And of course, you got to pilot the boat on the way back because you always wanted to.
Y Yeah, I did, I do like driving, and that was fun. I have a video of myself driving that boat. That's that was super fun.
You even lost your hat Indiana Jones style, and I think Ollie caught it before it went right off the
He
back of
did.
the boat.
Yeah, he did, this exact hat, so
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
it was. I took mine off just for the record before we even started. 'Cause I didn't want to lose mine. My head's not so big to hold it on. And then there's just I had to get it. We all had to get pictures with Bill because he's such a legendary figure. And of course, there's ogopogoquest.com, which if you're interested in learning more, definitely go check out his website.
Yeah,
I
I would
think.
say other than Arlene, Bill is the one to go to about an Ogopogo sighting.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And then of course there's a picture of Arlene who died in 2021. And we already talked about meeting her daughter, Lori, which I thought
Mhm.
that was neat. We did that was like the last real thing we did other than go and shoot the ending down at Lakeside. Like we just chatted with her and it was just a nice way to meet Lori and hear her story and basically implore her not just to sell off all of her mom's research, which has happened with other researchers after they've passed away, is it just their work disappears
Yeah.
into like history, basically.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Um, yeah, that was actually really nice of her to meet up, even though she declined to be interviewed, she still met up, and so we spoke face to face, which was really nice.
Bought her a coffee and hung out, and
Yeah.
yeah, that was a nice memory. And then any final thoughts? That's my son, by the way, at the Ogopogo statue when he was 7. I think he was a young lad then, 6, 7. But do you have any final thoughts about? I guess I'm really glad we did it. Like we did it, and had those 2.25, 2.25 days to make the film and research the book, and I'm really happy with
Yeah.
how everything turned out and where it's kind of gone.
Yeah, I am too, it's interesting to me too because I don't think I've done a project that's, gotten so much attention, so to keep talking about it all the time talking about those 2.5 days. I mean, dude, I don't know. When I was filming it, I wasn't thinking about everything after the fact. I was thinking about these next 2.5 days are gonna be hell, you know?
So much had to happen in 2.5 days.
You know?
Like
So,
there was
but
pressure. There
yeah,
was pressure there.
there was a lot of pressure, but, uh, they say pressure creates diamond,
I like
that's
that.
how it works, right?
And
And
it did.
then
Yeah, and it's been all summer talking about Ogopogo, and the attention that it's brought the story, I think, to me is very rewarding. That a lot more people are interested in it. That we're even doing presentations like this about it. I mean, we were on Coast to Coast AM a few weeks back talking about it. I just think it's a lot of it's. great how this story is getting more out there, and I hope it makes a lot more people aware of Ogopogo and that
Yeah,
it's not this big scary beast.
no, it is. It's totally a scary thing. I mean, look at the mouth on that statue. It could gobble your son up, dude.
Right? Its happy tongue sticking out.
Yeah. No.
And if you want to learn more, of course, there's the shameless self promotion. There's the book, The Legend of Ogopogo, and the documentary, Cursed Waters, both available now wherever you find your books and your movies. I
Yeah.
guess thanks for coming and doing this with me, Eli. This has been great. Thanks to Ryan for hosting us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so happy to be part of this.
This is good stuff, and hope everybody, if you come to Lake Okanagan, keep an eye out for Ogopogo.
And if you film it, contact us first.
Yeah,
Wow. Contact us first.
we will
So we can
preserve it.
make
And
Cursed Waters too.
yes, Cursed Waters 2, the second expedition. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Take care, everybody.